Sarah Whitmore's shotgun was already cocked before she saw his face. Blood dripped off the man's fingers onto her porch step, staining the wood where her husband used to stand. "One night," he rasped, gripping the rail so he wouldn't fall. "That's all I'm asking, ma'am." She should have pulled the trigger right then. Instead, she lowered the barrel an inch, staring at the wanted poster folded in her apron pocket, the one with his face on it under a different name. If you're watching this from a small town in Kansas or Texas or anywhere, the wind still smells like dust and cattle. Drop your state in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. And if stories of broken men finding redemption and strong women who refuse to be broken speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. The rifle felt heavier than it had that morning. Sarah's hands trembled around the stock, not from weakness, but from the particular kind of fear that came from being alone on 400 acres with a bleeding stranger at her gate. "I said get off my land." "Yes, ma'am." The man didn't move. His knees buckled instead, and he caught himself against the fence post, breath ragged. "Working on it." Up close in the dying orange light, she could see the wound wasn't clean. A tear through his side, dark and wet, soaking through a shirt that had once been white. His horse stood behind him, a rangy bay with its head hanging low, lathered with sweat, like it had been run near to death. "You're bleeding on my fence." "Didn't mean to inconvenience the fence, ma'am." His voice had a rasp to it, but there was something underneath a dry, tired humor that didn't match a man who looked ready to fall face first into the dirt. Sarah kept the rifle level. 3 years on this ranch alone had taught her that kindness got you robbed and trust got you buried. She'd buried enough already. "Who's after you?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if they're gonna come knocking on my door next." He considered that, swaying slightly, one hand pressed hard against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Fair point." He looked past her toward the barn, then back to her face. Not her chest, not her hips. Her face, like he was trying to read whether she'd shoot him or not. "I'm not asking for your bed, ma'am. Just your barn. One night. Come morning, I'll be gone and you'll never see me again." That what you tell every rancher's wife you bleed on. Ain't never bled on a rancher's wife before. A faint, pained smile. "You're the first." Sarah almost laughed. Almost. She caught it before it escaped, because laughing at a wounded outlaw was exactly the kind of foolishness that got a woman killed. Except he didn't move like an outlaw. He held himself with a strange, careful discipline, even wounded, even swaying like a soldier trying not to show the officers he was hurt. "You got a name." "Jack." A beat just long enough for her to notice it. "Jack Dalton." "That your real name? Does it need to be?" "Around here, yeah. Real names matter." He met her eyes then, and something passed through his. Not fear, not the desperate pleading of a man about to die, but something heavier. Regret, maybe. Or shame. "Then it's Jack Dalton," he said quiet. "For tonight, anyway." That should have been the moment she raised the rifle again and told him to ride on, bleed somewhere else, die somewhere that wasn't her land. Instead, her eyes drifted to the horse. It was standing crooked, favoring its front leg ribs, showing through its hide, despite the muscle underneath. A horse ridden hard by a man running from something. But there was a gentleness in the way Jack reached back, even now, even hurt, and rested his palm flat against the animal's neck, murmuring something too low for her to hear. She'd seen plenty of men in her life. Her father. Her husband. God rest him. Men who came through Ellsworth County, selling snake oil, running from debts, chasing gold that didn't exist. She'd never once seen a man half dead on his feet stop to comfort his horse before comforting himself. "Barn's got no lock," she said finally. "You so much as breathe wrong, I'll put a bullet in you before you clear the door." Something in his shoulders loosened just slightly. "Wouldn't expect nothing less. And if anyone comes looking for you, they won't find me here." He said it too fast, too certain. A lie or a hope dressed up as a promise. She filed that away, the way she filed away everything these days, carefully, quietly, waiting to see which pieces mattered. She lowered the rifle, but didn't uncock it. "Barn's that way. Don't need me to walk you." No, ma'am. He straightened, or tried to, wincing hard enough that she saw his jaw clench. I can manage. He couldn't. She watched him take 4 steps and stumble, catching the fence rail again, his breath coming out in a hiss through his teeth. Sarah stood there another moment, rifle heavy in her hands, telling herself this wasn't her problem. He wasn't her problem. Men who bled on her fence at sunset and lied about their names were never anybody's problem but their own. But then she thought of Reverend Coombs' sermon from 2 Sundays back, something about mercy being a debt owed even to strangers. And she thought of her husband, and the particular quiet that had swallowed her house since he'd been gone, a quiet so total some nights she talked to the walls just to hear a voice. "Lean on the horse," she said, exasperated with herself already. "Not on me." He glanced at her surprised, like he hadn't expected her to offer even that much. "Wouldn't dream of leaning on you, ma'am. Wouldn't be proper." "Since when do outlaws care about proper?" "Never said I was an outlaw. Didn't have to." She nodded toward the wanted poster shape she could see folded through the thin cotton of his coat pocket. His own poster tucked away, like a man carrying his own death sentence for safekeeping. His eyes followed hers, and for the first time, real alarm flickered across his face. "That's not what it looks like." "Looks like a wanted poster to me." "It's—" He stopped, pressed his lips together, blood dripping steady now onto the dirt between them. "It's complicated. Ain't it always?" She turned toward the barn rifle, still raised halfway, watching him from the corner of her eye as he limped after her, leading the horse with a hand that shook more than he'd probably wanted her to see. The barn smelled of hay and old leather, and in the dim lantern light, Sarah could finally see the full extent of the damage. The wound in his side was deep, a bullet graze that had torn skin and muscle, but mercifully hadn't lodged inside him. Still, he'd lost blood. A lot of it. His shirt was soaked through, and his face had gone the color of ash. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a hay bale. "I'm fine, ma'am. You're gray as a February sky. Sit down before you fall down and crack your skull on my barn floor, because I am not digging a grave for a man I don't even know." That earned her a real laugh, short-pained, but real. He sat. She fetched water, clean cloth, and the small tin of carbolic salve she kept for the livestock, because it was all she had, and blood was blood, whether it came from a horse or a man. He watched her work with a wary kind of attention, flinching when the cloth pressed too hard against the wound, biting back sounds that might have been curses in front of gentler company. "You always this generous to strangers who might be killers?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Never said I was generous." She wound a length of cloth around his ribs tighter than strictly necessary, and he grunted. "Said I don't want a dead man stinking up my barn." "Practical." "Around here, practical's the only thing that keeps a woman alive." He studied her while she worked, not in the way men usually looked at her, sizing up a widow alone, calculating what she might be worth or what she might give up easy. He looked at her hands instead. The calluses, the steadiness. "You've done this before," he said. "Not a question." "My husband kept cattle. Cattle kick. Cattle gore. You learn to patch a wound, or you learn to bury something." She tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. "Guess I got good at the first so I wouldn't have to do the second so often." Something shifted in his face. Recognition, maybe. Or grief. Answering grief. "Where's your husband now?" She should have told him it wasn't his business. Should have stood. Walked out, locked the house door behind her, and let him bleed quietly in the dark until morning came, and took him with it. Instead, the words came out before she could stop them, the way grief sometimes forced its way past every guard a person built. "Dead. 2 years this spring. Fever took him in 3 days. Wasn't even a dramatic way to go. No bullets, no outlaws, no glory. Just a man in a bed sweatin' and shiverin' and then not breathin' anymore." Her voice stayed flat, controlled the way she'd trained it to stay after 2 years of practice. "Ranch has been mine since. Just mine." "I'm sorry." "Don't need your sorry. Needed him alive. Sorry doesn't plow a field or mend a fence." She stood brushing hay from her skirt, putting distance between them, like distance could undo the confession she'd just handed a stranger. "You'll sleep here. There's a blanket in the tack room if you can manage to walk that far without bleeding out first." "Sarah." He caught himself. "Ma'am, I didn't ask your name." "Didn't offer it either." "Fair enough." She turned to leave, and his voice followed her low and rough. "Thank you. For the barn. For the—" He gestured vaguely at his bandaged side. "For not shooting me." "Don't thank me yet." She paused at the barn door, looking back at him, a man bleeding in her hay, wearing a stranger's name like a borrowed coat. "Give me a reason before mornin', and I still might." She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The rifle stayed propped by her bed loaded, and every creak of the old house sent her hand reaching for it in the dark. Around midnight, she gave up pretending sleep would come and sat at her kitchen table with a single candle burning low, the folded wanted poster spread out in front of her. Wanted Silas Vane. $500 reward. Wanted for the murder of Deputy Amos Reed. Armed and dangerous. The drawing wasn't perfect. Sketches rarely were all sharp angles and guesswork, but the eyes matched. The jaw matched. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow, the one she'd noticed while cleaning his wound, matched the crude lines someone had drawn beneath the word murder. Silas Vane, not Jack Dalton. A dead deputy. $500 more money than she'd seen in one place since her husband's funeral money that could fix the roof. Buy new stock, pay down the debt that crept higher every season she farmed this land alone. She could ride to town at first light. Tell Marshal Cole. Collect the reward. Be done with it before noon. But she kept thinking about the way he'd touched his horse's neck. The way his eyes had gone soft with grief when she spoke of her husband, like a man remembering a loss of his own. Killers didn't grieve like that. Did they? You don't know that, she told herself. You don't know anything about him except that he's dangerous, and he's lying. And men who lie about their names usually have good reason to. She folded the poster back into her apron pocket and blew out the candle. But sleep still refused her. And somewhere past midnight, she found herself standing at her bedroom window, staring toward the dark shape of the barn, wondering if the man inside it was sleeping easier than she was, or if guilt kept men like him awake too. Morning came gray and cold mist, clinging low to the fields. Sarah dressed before the sun fully cleared the horizon, rifle in hand moving toward the barn with the particular grim determination of a woman who had made a decision and intended to see it through, whatever that decision turned out to be. She found him already awake, sitting up against a hay bale, his face pale but steadier than the night before. He'd cleaned himself up as best he could with the water bucket she'd left face-washed, hair damp, shirt still stained, but no longer soaked. "Mornin'," he said, careful watching her face for a verdict. "You're still here. Said I'd be gone by mornin'. Mornin's here. I'm working on the gone part." He tried to stand, hissed, sat back down hard. "Might take a spell longer than I figured." Sarah crossed her arms, rifle still in hand, but pointed at the ground now instead of at him. "You know a deputy named Amos Reed?" The change in him was immediate, every trace of dry humor vanishing, replaced by something sharp and alert, almost frightened. "Where'd you hear that name?" "Found a poster." She didn't bother lying about it. "Silas Vane, wanted for murder. Face matches yours close enough to make me nervous." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed, but it wasn't the easy laugh from the night before. It was bitter, exhausted a sound with no joy left in it at all. "Course you did." He rubbed a hand down his face. "Course that's the one thing follows me clear out to Kansas." "So it's true. Some of it." He met her eyes, and there was something desperate in his expression. Now, a man aware that his life balanced on whatever she chose to believe next. "The name's true. Was true anyway before I buried it. The murder ain't. Every wanted man says that. I know it." His jaw tightened. "I know exactly how it sounds. But Amos Reed was my friend before he was anybody's dead deputy, and I'd have taken a bullet for him a dozen times over before I'd have put one in him myself." "Then who did?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sarah saw the shape of something far bigger than a barn fight or a drunken shooting. Something with weight to it. Something dangerous enough that a man would rather bleed out on a stranger's fence than speak its name out loud. "You don't want to know," he said finally. "The less you know, the safer you are. Safer than you already ain't just from letting me sleep in your barn." "That's supposed to comfort me." "No, ma'am. Supposed to warn you." He looked toward the barn door, toward the pale morning light beyond it, like he could already see riders coming over the horizon. "Man named Caleb Pike runs half the crooked business between here and Abilene. Cattle theft, land fraud, worse. Amos found out things about him that Pike couldn't afford anybody finding out. So Amos ended up dead, and I ended up wearing the blame for it. And now Pike's men are hunting me down to make sure I don't ever get the chance to tell anybody different." Sarah stood very still, turning the words over, testing them for the lie she expected to find. "That's a hell of a story. It's the truth, which don't mean much coming from a man in my position. I know that." He looked down at his hands, at the dried blood still crusted under his fingernails. "You got every right to ride to town and collect that reward, ma'am. $500 is $500, and I ain't got nothing to offer you that comes close to matching it. Not a fair trade given what I'm asking you to risk." "What are you asking?" "One more day." His voice was quiet, almost ashamed to be asking it. "My horse needs rest, and so do I if I'm going to make it to Abilene alive. One more day, and then I'm gone, whatever you decide to do after that." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. The wound she'd bandaged the horse, standing patient and loyal in the corner stall, the shame written plain across a face that had clearly expected to be turned in or shot, or both. She thought of Reed's name, a man she'd never met dead now, because of secrets too big for one deputy to carry alone. She thought of the reward money, and what it could fix, and what it would cost her conscience to take it from a man who might be telling the truth. "One more day," she said finally. "But you stay in that barn, and you don't so much as look at my house unless I come to you first. And if I find out you've lied to me, you won't need to find out. I'll be long gone before it matters." "That's not an answer." "No, ma'am." He held her gaze steady despite the pain still etched around his eyes. "It's a promise, best I got to give." She left him there and went about her chores, with her mind elsewhere, feeding chickens, drawing water, mending the same section of fence she'd mended 3 times already this year. Her hands moving on memory, while her thoughts circled back again and again to the man in her barn. Around midday, dust rose on the road leading to her property, and Sarah's stomach dropped straight to her boots. 3 riders moving at a hard trot, the kind of pace men only kept up when they were hunting something. She had just enough time to duck into the barn. "Riders coming," she hissed. 3 of them. Jack was on his feet before she finished the sentence, wincing, but moving with a speed that suggested adrenaline could override even a bullet wound when it needed to. "Pike's men, has to be." "Get in the loft, now." He didn't argue. He climbed slow and clumsy, with his injury disappearing into the shadowed hayloft, just as the sound of hooves grew close enough to rattle the barn's old boards. Sarah smoothed her apron, forced her breathing steady, and stepped out into the yard just as the 3 riders reined up at her gate. The lead rider was a broad man with a heavy jaw and cold eyes, a badge-shaped piece of tin pinned crooked to his vest. Not a lawman's badge, she realized on closer look, just something meant to look official enough to intimidate folks who didn't look too close. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Name's Evan Kincaid. We're looking for a fugitive goes by Silas Vane, maybe using another name now. Wounded. Might have come through this way." Sarah kept her hands folded in front of her apron, willing them not to shake. "Ain't seen anybody, Mr. Kincaid. Just me out here." "That so?" His eyes drifted past her toward the barn, lingering there a beat too long. "Lonely, ain't it, woman, alone way out here?" "I manage." "I'll bet you do." He smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "Mind if we take a look around? Fella we're huntin' is dangerous. Wouldn't want him hiding somewhere you don't even know about." Every instinct told Sarah to refuse, but refusing would only confirm every suspicion this man already carried. "Barn's got nothing but hay and my milk cow," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "But you're welcome to look if it eases your mind." She led them toward the barn with her heart hammering so hard she was certain they could hear it praying Jack had found somewhere in that loft dark enough, deep enough to disappear into completely. Kincaid swung down from his horse and walked the length of the barn, slowly kicking at loose hay, peering into empty stalls, while his two companions waited by the door, with hands resting too casually near their holsters. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look bored instead of terrified. "Awful lot of blood on this hay," Kincaid said suddenly, crouching, running 2 fingers through a dark stain on the barn floor, the spot where she'd tended Jack's wound the night before. Her mind raced. "Cow calved rough 2 nights back. Lost a fair bit of blood before I got her settled." Kincaid studied the stain a moment longer, then straightened, wiping his fingers on his trousers. "Awful lot of blood for a Calvin." "Never birthed a calf, Mr. Kincaid." Something flickered behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe at being challenged by a woman, but he let it go, glancing once more toward the loft above before turning back toward the door. "No, ma'am. Can't say I have." He paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "You let us know if you see anything, ma'am. Man like Vane, he's the kind who'd sweet-talk a lonely woman right into getting herself killed. Wouldn't want that on your conscience. I'll keep that in mind." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat again, and the 3 of them rode off in a cloud of dust back the way they'd come. Sarah stood frozen in the yard until the sound of hooves faded entirely, and only then did her knees threaten to give out beneath her. "They're gone," she called up toward the loft voice, shaking now that there was no one left to hide it from. Jack's head appeared over the edge, pale, sweat-soaked, despite the cool afternoon air. "You didn't have to lie for me." "Didn't have much choice considerin' I already let you sleep in my barn." She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow. "That man, Kincaid. He works for this Pike you spoke of. His right hand. Worse than Pike in some ways. Pike's greedy, but Kincaid enjoys it." Jack climbed down slowly, favoring his side, and stood facing her in the dim barn light. Something raw and grateful in his expression. "You just made yourself a target, ma'am, lying to a man like that. I should go. Tonight. Before they come back." "You can barely stand." "Don't matter. I won't have you paying for my sins. Wasn't planning on paying for anybody's sins." Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended, fear curdling into something closer to anger. "But I also ain't about to have 3 armed men circling back here tonight while you're too weak to run, and I'm alone in that house with a rifle and a prayer. So you'll stay and you'll rest and come morning. We'll figure this out proper, not because I trust you understand, but because getting you killed on my land helps nobody." Jack stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, surprise maybe, or the first fragile edge of something like hope. "You're a hard woman to figure, Sarah Whitmore." She startled at the sound of her name, realizing she'd never given it understanding in the same breath that he must have heard it from Kincaid's men, or guessed it from something in the yard. "Don't go getting any ideas about figuring me out, Mr. Vane." "Dalton," he corrected softly. "Still Dalton far as anybody needs to know." "Fine, Dalton." She turned to leave, then paused at the barn door, looking back at him one more time. "That key you carry, the brass one tied with the ribbon. Kincaid mentioned it real quiet to one of his men thinking I didn't hear. Said Pike wants it bad." Jack's hand moved unconsciously to his coat pocket, where something small and hard pressed against the fabric. "It ain't nothing." Didn't ask if it was nothing. Asked if it was something worth dying over. He was quiet a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, heavy with a weight she was only beginning to understand. "It's the only thing standing between Pike and getting away with murder. Amos Reed died protecting it. And now I'm the only one left to carry it forward." He looked up at her eyes, dark with something that might have been fear, or might have been resolve. "So yes, ma'am. It's worth dying over. Question is, whether it's worth you dying over too, and I never meant to put that choice in front of you." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle over her like the coming dusk, heavy, inevitable, impossible to outrun now that it had already found her. She thought of her husband's grave, of the quiet house, waiting for her, of the reward poster, still folded in her apron pocket, like a temptation she'd already refused once, and would likely refuse again. "Well," she said finally, voice steadier than she felt. "Seems that choice got made the second I let you through my gate." She left him standing in the barn with those words hanging in the air, and walked back toward her house alone. The mist beginning to rise again off the fields as the sun dropped low and orange behind the hills. A woman who had buried one kind of grief, only to find herself standing at the edge of another far more dangerous kind of hope. That night she didn't sleep with the rifle by her bed out of fear of the man in her barn. She slept with it close, because for the first time in 2 years, she had someone worth protecting again, and the realization terrified her more than any wanted poster ever could. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of her dog barking sharp and frantic out toward the barn. She was up and dressed in the time it took to grab the rifle from beside her bed, bare feet cold against the floorboards, heart already hammering. The yard was empty when she stepped outside. No riders, no dust on the road. Just Bess, the old hound standing rigid at the barn door, hackles raised growling low at something inside. "Jack." No answer. She pushed the door open with the rifle barrel first, and found him sitting bolt upright against the hay bale, drenched in sweat, one hand fisted so tight around a bit of rope that his knuckles had gone white. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing her, not really. They were seeing something else, somewhere else, a memory dragging him under. "Reed," he was saying, voice cracked and low. "Don't, Amos? Don't you go out there. They're waiting on you. Don't, Jack." She crouched in front of him, keeping distance, but pitching her voice steady, the same tone she used to gentle a spooked horse. "Jack, you're dreamin'. Wake up." His eyes snapped to her face, and for one terrible second, she saw a stranger looking back, hunted, violent, ready to fight his way out of whatever memory held him. Then recognition crashed back into his features and he sagged, breathing hard, ashamed. "Sorry," he rasped. "Didn't mean to wake you. Wasn't asleep. Dog was making enough noise to wake the dead." She sat back on her heels, studying him in the gray pre-dawn light seeping through the barn slats. "You said his name. Reed. Man doesn't forget watching his friend die." Jack scrubbed a hand down his face, and for a moment he looked older than she'd first taken him for, not in years, but in the particular exhaustion that came from carrying something too heavy for too long. "Every night since it happened. Same dream. I'm always trying to reach him before Kincaid does. Never do." Sarah didn't say anything comforting because she didn't have anything comforting to offer, and false comfort had never sat right with her. Instead, she reached out, surprising herself as much as him, and pressed the back of her hand briefly to his forehead, checking for fever, the way she would with any wounded creature on her land. "No fever," she said, pulling back quick, like she'd touched a hot stove. "That's something at least. You checking on me or on your investment?" A ghost of his old humor, thin but present. "Ain't invested nothing in you, Mr. Dalton. Just don't want a corpse stinking up my barn." But her voice had lost its edge, and they both knew it. By mid-morning, Jack was strong enough to stand without swaying, though he still moved, careful, one hand pressed to his bandaged side whenever he thought she wasn't looking. Sarah found him in the barn doorway, watching her work the far field, and something about the sight of him standing upright, alert, alive, instead of collapsed and bleeding, settled a knot in her chest she hadn't known was there. "You should be restin'. Restin' gets a man caught." He nodded toward the horizon. "Kincaid'll be back. Men like him don't give up just 'cause a woman lied to their face once." "Then what do you propose? You can't ride yet, and you can't stay." "I know it." He rubbed the back of his neck, frustration plain. "Truth is, ma'am, I don't rightly know what I propose. Never planned on getting shot 2 days from Abilene. Never planned on a lot of things that happened this week." Sarah set down the hoe she'd been carrying and crossed her arms. "Tell me about the key." He went very still. "Told you already. It's evidence." "You told me it was evidence." Didn't tell me what kind, or where it leads, or why a man's willing to bleed out on my fence rather than let it go. She held his gaze unflinching. You want my help keeping you alive another day? You're gonna have to trust me with something real, Jack. Can't keep patching a man I don't understand. For a long moment he said nothing, and she thought he might refuse, outright, might climb onto that half-starved horse and ride off into whatever fate waited for him, rather than hand a stranger the truth. But then his shoulders dropped, some invisible weight shifting, and he reached into his coat and drew out the small brass key on its faded blue ribbon, holding it up between them like a confession. This opens a lockbox that belonged to Amos Reed, he said. Inside that lockbox is a ledger, Pike's ledger. Every crooked land deal, every bribed judge, every rancher he squeezed off his water rights using forged deeds. Amos spent 2 years building that case quiet, careful, never letting Pike know he was even looking. His jaw tightened. Pike found out anyway. Had Amos killed for it, made it look like a robbery gone wrong, and framed me for pulling the trigger on account of I was the last man seen riding with him that night. Why you? 'Cause I used to ride for Pike. The confession came out low, bitter, like it cost him something to say it out loud. 2 years back. Didn't know what kind of man he was at first, thought I was just herding cattle, running supplies. Took me too long to see the rot underneath. By the time I did, I was in deep enough that walking away looked a lot like dying. Amos was the one who helped me get clear of it. Helped me build a new life under a different name. And I repaid him by being standing nearby the night Pike's men put a bullet in his back. Sarah absorbed that in silence, watching the shame carve deep lines into his face. So the lockbox belongs to his daughter now, Lily. She's staying with her aunt in Abilene, doesn't even know what her daddy died protecting. Jack closed his fist around the key. I promised him the night he died in my arms that I'd see it through. Get that ledger to a judge who ain't in Pike's pocket. Clear both our names, his for dying honest, and mine for not being the man everybody thinks I am. That's a hell of a promise to keep while bleeding out in a stranger's barn. Ain't got a choice in the matter. He looked at her, something raw and pleading in his expression, despite the pride fighting to keep it hidden. I know what I'm asking, letting you know this much. Knowing this gets you killed just as sure as harboring me does if Pike's men ever put it together. I should have kept my mouth shut and let you think whatever you wanted. Then why didn't you? 'Cause you asked me straight, and you've earned straight answers. More than that even. He hesitated, then added quieter. Ain't had anybody look at me like a man worth saving in a long while, Sarah Whitmore. Didn't much feel right lying to the first person who did. The words hit her harder than she expected, landing somewhere in her chest she'd thought had gone permanently numb since her husband's funeral. She turned away before he could see whatever crossed her face in response, busying her hands with the hoe again, though her mind had long since abandoned any thought of farming. Get some rest, she said, voice rougher than she intended. You're gonna need your strength if we're riding to Abilene. Jack went very still. You think I'm letting you ride off half-heeled on a starving horse straight into a trap? You'll be dead before you clear the county line. She didn't look at him, kept her eyes fixed on the field ahead. Someone's got to make sure you actually reach that lockbox, instead of bleeding out in a ditch somewhere. Sarah, don't. She held up a hand. Don't go arguing with me about it, and don't go acting grateful either. I got my reasons, and they ain't got nothing to do with you personal. But even as she said it, she knew it for the lie it was. That night, over a supper of beans and cornbread eaten in her kitchen, the first meal Jack had taken inside her house rather than hidden away in the barn, Sarah found herself asking questions she had no business asking, and Jack found himself answering them with an honesty that surprised them both. You got family, she asked. Somewhere waiting on you once this is done. No family left to speak of. Ma died when I was young. Pa drank himself into an early grave not long after. He turned his fork over in his hands, not eating much, despite his hunger. Guess that's part of why Pike's outfit looked appealing once. Man offers you a place to belong when you got nowhere else, it's hard to see the rot underneath the shine. And now I got a dead friend's promise to keep, and a lockbox 2 days' ride away, and a woman feeding me cornbread who's got every reason in the world to have shot me on sight. A faint, tired smile. Reckon that's more than I figured I'd have few days back. Sarah found herself smiling despite herself, quick and unguarded, before she caught it and looked down at her plate. Don't go getting sentimental on my cornbread, Mr. Dalton. It ain't that good. Ma'am, with respect, it's the best thing I've eaten in 6 months. He said it plain without flattery, and somehow that made it land harder than any smooth compliment could have. Wasn't talking about the cornbread anyhow. The silence that followed stretched long and warm, neither of them quite willing to break it until the sound of hoofbeats on the road outside shattered it entirely. Sarah was on her feet before the second beat landed, rifle in hand, blowing out the lamp so the house went dark. Barn. Now. Jack didn't argue this time. He moved fast for a wounded man, slipping out the back door into the darkness, and Sarah watched from the kitchen window as a single rider approached, not 3 men this time, just one, moving slow and careful up the drive. She recognized the shape of him before he even dismounted. Marshal Henry Cole. Broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, a man she'd known since before her husband's death. One of the few lawmen in the county who'd never once looked at her with pity or suspicion. She opened the door before he could knock, rifle lowered but not put away. "Marshal, bit late for a social call." "Ain't social, Sarah, and you know it." Cole's eyes moved past her, scanning the dark house behind her with the practiced thoroughness of a man who'd spent 30 years reading rooms for danger. "Got word Kincaid's men were out this way yesterday asking about a fugitive. That true?" "They stopped by. Didn't find anything." "Because there was nothing to find, or because you're better at hiding things than they are at looking." His gaze was steady, not accusing, but sharp enough that Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Henry." She used his first name, deliberately softening her voice. "You've known me a long time. You really think I'd shelter a murderer?" "I think," he said slowly, "that Silas Vane ain't near as guilty as that poster claims. And I think Amos Reed was my friend for 15 years before somebody put a bullet in his back and called it a robbery. And I think if there's a chance, even a small one, that the man they're hunting actually knows the truth of what happened, I'd rather find him myself than let Kincaid's outfit get to him first." Sarah's breath caught. "You don't believe he did it?" "I believe Amos Reed was investigating Caleb Pike for the better part of 2 years, and I believe that investigation got him killed, and I believe the man who's supposedly guilty of that murder has spent every day since running instead of hiding, which ain't exactly the behavior of a man who thinks he can talk his way clear if caught." Cole's jaw tightened. "But I can't prove any of that without evidence, and evidence has a way of disappearing when Pike's involved." For a long moment, Sarah stood frozen at her own doorway, weighing trust against certainty, weighing a lawman's badge against a wounded stranger's word. Then slowly, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Barn," she said quietly. "He's in the barn." Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders loosened like a held breath finally released. "Figured as much the way you were standing there like a woman guarding something." He moved past her toward the barn, and Sarah followed close behind, heart hammering with the uncertainty of whether she'd just made the smartest decision of her life or the most dangerous one. Jack came out of the shadows with his hands raised the moment Cole's lantern light hit the barn interior, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Marshal?" "Silas Vane." Cole studied him for a long moment, taking in the bandages, the exhaustion, the wary readiness of a man expecting violence at any moment. "Or is it something else these days?" "Jack Dalton, mostly. Silas Vane's the name I buried when I got clear of Pike's outfit 2 years back." Jack lowered his hands slowly, watching Cole's face for any sign of hostility. "You gonna arrest me, Marshal, or you gonna hear me out first?" "Depends on what you got to say." So, Jack told him. The same story he'd told Sarah Pike's crooked empire. Amos Reed's 2-year investigation, the murder disguised as robbery, the frame that had followed him ever since. Cole listened without interrupting his weathered face, giving nothing away until Jack finally fell silent, spent from the effort of reliving it. "That key," Cole said finally. "The one supposedly opens Reed's lockbox. You got it on you." Jack drew it out, holding it up in the lantern light. Right here. Been carrying it since the night he died, trying to get it to Abilene before Pike's men catch up to me." Cole studied the key for a long moment, then looked up, something decided in his expression. "I can't ride with you, official. Pike's got eyes on half the lawmen in this county, including some who ain't as honest as they ought to be. Man like me showing up alongside, you'd be a death sentence for both of us before we cleared the first mile." "Then what good are you, Marshal?" Sarah asked, sharper than she intended. "Good for this." Cole reached into his coat and drew out a folded letter sealed with wax. "Judge Elias Harmon out of Abilene. Man's cleaner than most anyhow, and he's got no love for Pike after Pike tried buying him off 2 years back and got refused. This letter tells him to expect you tells him what you're carrying and asks him to keep it quiet until you arrive safe." Jack took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from weakness or emotion, Sarah couldn't tell. "Why help me, Marshal? You don't know me, not really. I knew Amos Reed. Man like that doesn't die for nothing, and he sure as hell doesn't spend his last breath trying to save a killer's skin." Cole's voice roughened slightly. "You get that ledger to Judge Harmon, you clear both your names, and maybe, just maybe, I get to bury my friend knowing his death meant something instead of just making Caleb Pike richer." The weight of that settled over the barn like a held breath, and Sarah found herself blinking back, an unexpected sting behind her eyes, moved by a grief that wasn't even hers to carry. "There's something else," Cole added, voice dropping lower. "Kincaid ain't operating alone out here. Got word this morning that Pike himself is traveling toward Abilene, planning on being there when if that lockbox surfaces. Man wants to make sure any evidence gets buried personal, instead of leaving it to chance. Pike's coming himself." Jack's face paled further. "That's not like him. Man usually stays hidden, lets Kincaid do his dirty work, which tells you how important that ledger is to him." Cole's eyes moved between Jack and Sarah, something almost apologetic in his expression. "You two need to move fast, and you need to move careful. I'll do what I can from here, keep Kincaid's men occupied best I'm able, buy you what time I can. But once you're past county lines, you're on your own." Sarah felt the weight of what was being asked settle fully onto her shoulders for the first time, not just harboring a wounded fugitive, but riding beside him straight into the heart of danger, carrying evidence that powerful men would kill to bury. "I'm going with him," she said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice at all. Cole studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Figured you might say that." He glanced at Jack. "You take care of her, Dalton. Sarah Whitmore's buried enough already. Wouldn't sit right with me adding to that particular grave count. Wasn't planning on letting anything happen to her, Marshal." Jack's voice carried a quiet certainty that Sarah felt more than heard, settling somewhere deep in her chest. "Not while I'm still breathing." They left before dawn 2 days later, once Jack's wound had closed enough to bear the strain of hard riding. Sarah packed light, a change of clothes, dried meat, what money she had hidden away for emergencies, just such as this, and left instructions with her nearest neighbor, an elderly widow named Martha Briggs, to tend her chickens and milk cow until she returned. "You sure about this child?" Martha had asked, her weathered face creased with worry as she watched Sarah load her saddlebags. "Riding off with a wanted man chasing evidence against a criminal like Caleb Pike man's got more money and more guns than the whole county combined. I'm sure of one thing, Martha. If I stay here and do nothing, and that man dies trying to do right by his friend, I don't think I could live with myself." Sarah tightened the last strap on her saddle. 2 years I've been just surviving, just getting through each day quiet as I could manage, telling myself that was enough. Maybe it's time I did something that actually matters." Martha's eyes softened, understanding dawning slow. "This ain't just about the evidence, is it?" Sarah didn't answer directly, but the flush that crept up her neck answered for her. "Be careful, Sarah." Martha squeezed her hand. "Man like that broken running, carrying that much weight, he'll either heal you or he'll break you further. Ain't often a middle ground with men like that. I know it." Sarah swung up into her saddle, looking back toward her house one last time, the home she'd built with her husband, the grave she'd tend when she returned the life that would be waiting no matter how this journey ended. But I'd rather risk breakin' trying to do right than keep survivin' small and safe for the rest of my days. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon. Jack still favoring his side, but steady enough in the saddle, the brass key hidden safe beneath his shirt, the road to Abilene stretching long and uncertain ahead of them. The first day passed in relative quiet, the two of them keeping a hard pace, speaking little beyond necessity, both too aware of the danger trailing somewhere behind them to waste breath on conversation. It was near dusk, making camp in a shallow ravine hidden from the road, that Jack finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to come." "We covered this already." "I know we did. Doesn't mean I understand it." He sat across the small fire from her face half-shadowed in the dying light. "You had a life, Sarah. A ranch, a routine safety. I'm asking you to throw all that away for a stranger's promise to a dead man." Sarah stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "You know what my life looked like before you showed up bleeding at my gate. Same day over and over. Wake up, work, the fields, feed the stock, eat supper alone, go to bed alone. Wake up and do it again. 2 years of that. 2 years of telling myself it was enough just to survive." Her voice cracked slightly, and she hated it, but pushed through anyway. "It wasn't enough. Hasn't been enough for a long while. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until something forced me to, and I'm that something." "You're that something." She met his eyes across the flames. "Don't go reading more into it than that, though. I'm here to see justice done for a man who deserved better than what Pike gave him. I'm here 'cause running from danger my whole life never once made me feel like I was actually living. Whatever else might be true." She stopped herself, unwilling to finish the thought. "Whatever else might be true," Jack prompted gently. "Don't push your luck, Mr. Dalton." He smiled, faint but genuine, and let the silence settle between them again, comfortable this time, instead of strained. They were 3 hours from Abilene the next afternoon when the first shots rang out. Sarah's horse reared, and only years of ranch work kept her seated, as Jack shouted, "Down, get down!" already wheeling his own mount toward a cluster of rocks off the trail. She followed, heart slamming against her ribs as bullets kicked up dirt behind them. "Kincaid!" Jack's voice was tight with fury and fear in equal measure as they dismounted behind the rocks, both drawing what weapons they carried. "He must have had men watching the roads out of the county." "How many?" Sarah's hands were steady, despite the terror coursing through her years of practical necessity overriding panic. "Can't tell. 3, maybe 4. Jack peered around the rock edge, ducking back fast as another shot cracked past close enough that Sarah felt the wind of it. "We're pinned. Can't outrun 'em on tired horses, can't outgun 'em from here." "Then what?" His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the same desperate calculation she felt in her own chest. No good options, only bad ones, and worse ones. "There's a gully maybe 200 yards back the way we came. Steep enough, a horse can't follow easy. If we can reach it, we'll be on foot exposed the whole way there." "I know it." His jaw tightened. "Sarah, if this goes wrong—" "Don't!" She cut him off fierce. "Don't you dare start saying goodbye to me now, Jack Dalton. We didn't come this far for you to give up on the first hard turn." Something fierce and grateful flashed across his face. "Never said I was giving up. Said if it goes wrong, you run. Don't look back. Don't wait on me. You run for that gully, and you don't stop till you're safe. Promise me that much. I'm not leaving you to die out here." "Sarah." "I said no." Her voice cracked with the force of her conviction. "I've buried one man already, Jack. Ain't burying another one out of some fool notion that running away makes me safer. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." The gunfire intensified closer now, and Jack's expression shifted from argument to grim acceptance in the span of a heartbeat. "Together, then. On my count, we make for that gully you first I'll cover." "Jack." "No arguing this part, Sarah. Please." His voice broke slightly on the plea, raw with a fear that had nothing to do with his own survival. "I can't protect that ledger, and protect you both if you're running beside me instead of ahead. Let me do this one thing right." She wanted to argue further, but the sound of hoofbeats growing closer stole the opportunity, and she nodded instead, throat too tight for words. Now! Jack surged up, firing twice toward the approaching riders, and Sarah ran, legs burning, breath ragged the gully, seeming impossibly far, even as it grew closer with every desperate stride. Behind her, she heard Jack's gun firing again, heard a man's shout of pain, heard the pounding of her own heart drowning out nearly everything else. She reached the gully edge and threw herself down its steep slope, tumbling more than climbing, and turned back just in time to see Jack stumble, clutching his side, where the old wound had torn open again, blood already staining through his shirt. Jack! He pushed through it, forcing his legs to carry him those final desperate yards, and half fell, half slid down into the gully beside her, just as bullets sparked off the rocks above them. You're hit. Wound tore. Ain't new. He was pale, sweating, but conscious, pressing a hand hard against his side. We can't stay here. Gully leads toward a creek bed half-mile on. If we can reach running water, might cover our tracks enough to lose 'em. Sarah helped him up, draping his arm over her shoulders, despite his protests, and together they staggered down the gully floor, the sound of Kincaid's men searching the rim above, growing gradually more distant as the terrain worked in their favor. They didn't stop moving until full dark had fallen, finally collapsing beneath the cover of a rocky overhang beside the creek. Jack had promised both of them exhausted, injured, and alive. That was too close, Sarah gasped, checking his wound by feel in the darkness, unwilling to risk a light that might give away their position. Story of my life lately. A weak attempt at humor undercut by the pain evident in his voice. Sarah, listen to me. If they catch us before we reach Abilene, they won't. If they do, he pressed on, voice urgent, despite his exhaustion. You take the key. You run and you find Judge Harmon and you give him that letter from Cole. Don't wait on me. Don't try to save me. That ledger matters more than either of us. I already told you I'm not leaving you. And I'm telling you that ledger is worth more than my life, and if it comes down to choosing, you choose the ledger. His hand found hers in the darkness, gripping tight. Please, Sarah. I need to know you'll do that much if it comes to it. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that no piece of evidence, however important, was worth more than a living man's life. But something in his voice, desperate pleading, carrying 2 years of guilt and grief he'd never fully set down, stopped the refusal in her throat. Fine, she whispered instead, hating the word even as she said it. But it ain't gonna come to that, Jack. I won't let it. Stubborn woman. Damn right. Her voice wavered despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Now hush and rest. We got a long way still to go, and I need you alive to make it there. They reached the outskirts of Abilene 2 days later. Exhausted, filthy, running on what little food remained in their saddlebags, both nursing wounds that had never properly healed. The town rose up out of the plains like a promise and a threat in equal measure safety. If they could reach Judge Harmon before Pike's men found them again, or a trap, if Pike had already positioned his people to intercept them at the very doorstep of justice. There, Jack murmured, nodding toward a modest courthouse near the center of town. Harmon's office. If we can reach him. Jack Dalton. The voice came from behind them, cold and satisfied, and Sarah's blood ran ice cold as she turned to see Evan Kincaid sitting astride his horse, not 30 yards away, flanked by 4 armed men, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Or should I still be calling you Silas Vane? Never could keep track of which lie you were wearing this week. Kincaid. Jack's hand moved instinctively toward Sarah, positioning himself half in front of her, despite his weakened state. How'd you find us? Wasn't hard, once we figured you were heading for Harmon. Kincaid's eyes moved to Sarah, lingering with an assessment that made her skin crawl. And you brought company. Didn't figure you for the type to drag an innocent woman into your mess, Dalton. Guess desperation makes fools of even careful men. She's got nothing to do with this. She's got everything to do with this, seeing as she's the one who lied to my face and hid you in her barn. Kincaid's smile widened, cruel and certain. Mr. Pike's gonna want to have words with both of you once we get that key you're carrying. Now we can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Either way, that ledger ends up in my hands before this day's through. Sarah felt Jack's hand tighten around hers, felt the desperate calculation running behind his eyes as he weighed their impossible options. 4 armed men, no cover, and a courthouse still 50 yards distant across open ground. Sarah. He breathed, barely audible. When I move, you run for the courthouse. Don't stop no matter what happens. Jack, no. Please. His eyes met hers, full of a desperate tenderness that stole the breath from her lungs, even in the face of mortal danger. I need you safe. Whatever happens to me next, I need to know you're safe. Kincaid's men were closing the distance now, weapons raised, and Sarah understood with sudden terrible clarity that whatever came next would determine everything: Jack's life, the truth about Amos Reed's murder, and the fragile, impossible thing that had grown between them across these desperate days on the run. On 3, Jack whispered, already tensing to move. 1. Kincaid's voice cut across the distance, cold and final. Last chance, Dalton. Hand over the key or we start shootin', and I promise you we won't be aimin' just at you. The threat hung in the air, absolute and undeniable, and Sarah felt Jack's grip on her hand falter, not from weakness, but from the terrible weight of a choice no man should ever have to make. Jack never reached 2. A rifle shot cracked from the courthouse steps behind them, and one of Kincaid's men screamed, dropping his pistol and clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted instantly, horses rearing, men shouting, Kincaid wheeling his mount hard to find the source of the shot. Marshal's office, federal deputy, drop your weapons. Sarah's head snapped toward the voice. A lawman stood on the courthouse steps, rifle still raised, badge glinting even from this distance, flanked by 2 more men with shotguns leveled. Kincaid's face twisted with fury and calculation in equal measure, his eyes darting between the wounded man on the ground, the fresh guns now aimed his way, and Jack and Sarah still frozen in the open street. This ain't over, Dalton, Kincaid snarled, already backing his horse away. Pike wants that ledger, and Pike gets what he wants. You just bought yourself borrowed time. Get out of my town, Kincaid. The lawman's voice carried clear across the street, hard as iron. Next bullet won't be a warning. Kincaid held Jack's gaze one more second, a promise of violence deferred, not abandoned, then spurred his horse and wheeled away, his remaining men scrambling to follow, leaving their wounded companion groaning in the dirt behind them. Sarah's legs finally gave out from under her, and only Jack's arm, quick, despite his own weakness, kept her upright. Sarah, look at me. You're all right. Sarah, look at me. Her voice shook badly. I'm fine. Just... She couldn't finish the sentence, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once, leaving her hands trembling and her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Easy. Jack's hand found the back of her neck, gentle, grounding his own breathing, none too steady either. You're all right. We're all right. Just breathe. The lawman approached at a jog, rifle lowered now but not holstered, his eyes sharp with assessment as he took in both of them, filthy, exhausted, bloodied. You're the 2 Marshal Cole wired ahead about... Depends who's askin', Jack said warily. Deputy Thomas Reyes, Judge Harmon's expectin' you. He glanced toward the direction Kincaid had fled. Didn't figure they'd try something this bold right in the middle of town. Pike's getting desperate. Or confident, Jack muttered. Men like Pike don't take risks unless he thinks he's already won. Judge Elias Harmon's office smelled of pipe tobacco and old law books, and the man himself looked exactly like what Sarah imagined a fair judge should look like. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of weathered patience that came from decades of sorting truth from lies in a courtroom. He read Marshal Cole's letter twice before setting it down and studying Jack and Sarah with unhurried scrutiny. You've had quite a journey from what I understand. Harmon's voice was measured, careful. Marshal Cole speaks highly of your character, Mr. Dalton, given the circumstances. That carries weight with me. But I'll be honest with you both. Caleb Pike has friends in places that make my job considerably more complicated than it ought to be. We understand that, Your Honor, Sarah said. But that ledger's the only thing that can prove Jack's innocence and expose what Pike's really done. if it exists as described. Harmon's eyes moved to the key still hanging from Jack's neck. Where is this lockbox now? With Reed's daughter, Lily. She's staying with her aunt somewhere in town. Jack's jaw tightened. Problem is, I've never met the girl. Don't even know her aunt's name. Amos never got the chance to tell me more than that before. He stopped, the memory clearly still raw. Before he died in your arms. Harmon finished quietly. Yes, Cole mentioned that detail. He steepled his fingers, considering. There's a woman in this town, Constance Whitfield, who took in Reed's sister's family some years back after her husband passed. If memory serves, that's where you'd find the girl. Relief flooded through Sarah, quick and fierce. Can you take us there? I can do better than that. I can send Deputy Reyes with you quietly so as not to draw attention. Harmon's expression turned grave. But I want to caution you both. If Pike learns you've located the girl before that ledger's secured, he won't hesitate to use her as leverage. A child in danger changes every calculation. Jack's face went pale at the thought. Then we move now, tonight. The Whitfield house sat on a quiet street at the edge of town. Modest but well-kept lamplight, glowing warm through curtained windows. Sarah's heart ached at the domestic normalcy of it, a life continuing unaware of the danger circling closer with every hour. Constance Whitfield answered the door herself, a stout woman with kind eyes that turned wary the moment Deputy Reyes introduced Jack by name. Silas Vane? She breathed, stepping back like the name itself might bite her. You've got some nerve showing up at this house. Ma'am, I understand your fear, but I promise you. He didn't kill Amos, Sarah interrupted, stepping forward. He's been framed, Mrs. Whitfield. We've got a judge and a marshal who believe him. All we need is what Amos left behind the lockbox he entrusted to his daughter. Constance's eyes moved between them, suspicious, but wavering. Lily's barely 11 years old. Lost her mother to fever 3 years back, and now her daddy too. That child's been through enough without strangers showing up demanding her father's belongings. We're not demanding anything, Jack said, voice gentling. Amos was my friend, Mrs. Whitfield. Closest thing to family I had left after my own kin died out. He trusted me with something important before he passed, and I intend to see that trust honored, even if it costs me everything. Something in his voice, the raw grief underneath the words, seemed to reach her because Constance's shoulders finally eased just slightly. Wait here. She returned minutes later with a small girl in tow, dark-haired, solemn-eyed, clutching a worn rag doll, like a shield against the world. Lily Reed studied Jack with an intensity far beyond her years, and Sarah watched Jack's composure crack at the sight of her Amos Reed's daughter carrying her father's eyes. You knew my papa, Lily said. Not a question. Best friend I ever had. Jack crouched down to her level, careful, gentle. He talked about you all the time, Lily. Said you were the smartest, bravest girl in the whole territory. Tears welled in the girl's eyes, but her chin lifted stubborn in a way that reminded Sarah painfully of Jack himself. Are you the one who's going to finish what he started, make the bad men pay for what they did? Jack's throat worked visibly before he could answer. That's exactly what I aim to do. But I need your help, Lily. Your papa left something with you, didn't he? Something important before he couldn't finish it. Lily nodded slowly and disappeared back into the house, returning moments later with a small cedar box clutched tight against her chest. He gave me this the week before. Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to guard it with my life and only give it to someone who knew the password. Password? Sarah's stomach dropped. They hadn't accounted for this. Jack's face tensed, thinking hard mining memories of conversations with a dead friend for anything that might unlock this final barrier. Amos loved fishing. Used to talk about this one spot out past the old mill where he caught the biggest catfish of his life. Called it... He stopped, eyes lighting with sudden certainty. He called it his cathedral. Said it was the closest thing to church a sinner like him would ever find. Lily's eyes widened, and a small, surprised smile broke through her solemn expression. That's it. That's the password. She whispered something to the box, some mechanism clicking free, and handed it over to Jack with trembling hands. "Promise me you'll make them pay. Promise me my papa didn't die for nothing." "I promise," Jack said, voice thick with emotion. "On my life, Lily. I promise." They opened the box back at Judge Harmon's office under lamplight, with Deputy Reyes standing guard at the door. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages dense with handwriting numbers. Dates, names that made Harmon's face go grim as he flipped through them. "My God," he murmured. "This is more thorough than I dared hope. Land deeds forged in 3 different counties. Bribes to 2 circuit judges, thankfully neither of them me. Water rights stolen from at least a dozen ranching families, including—" He stopped, looking up sharply at Sarah. "Including a Thomas Whitmore dated 18 months back." Sarah's blood went cold. "That's my husband's name." Harmon's eyes softened with sudden understanding. "There's a notation here in Reed's hand. Says Pike's men manufactured a water rights dispute against your late husband's property, planning to force a sale once the man died, and left a widow alone to fight it. Seems your husband's death interrupted something Pike had been planning for a good while." The room seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. "Wait, you're saying Pike had designs on my land before my husband even died? Says here Reed suspected something worse." Harmon continued reading carefully. "A note dated just weeks before your husband's passing questioning whether the fever that took him was entirely natural. Reed apparently intended to investigate further, but he died first," Jack finished grimly. "Sarah? No." Sarah's voice came out strangled, disbelieving. "No, my husband died of fever. Everyone said so. The doctor said so." "The doctor who signed off," Harmon said carefully, "is listed 3 pages back, receiving payment from one of Pike's shell companies for services unspecified." Sarah felt the floor drop away entirely. 2 years of grief of believing her husband's death had been nothing but cruel random misfortune, and now the possibility that it had been murder orchestrated by the very man whose crimes she'd risked her life to expose crashed over her like a physical blow. Jack was at her side, instantly steadying her as her knees buckled. Sarah, breathe. He killed my husband." Her voice shook with a fury so complete it frightened her. "That monster killed Thomas so he could steal my land, and I've been mourning an accident that was never an accident at all." "We don't know for certain yet," Jack said, though his own face had gone hard with barely contained rage. "But if it's true, I want him to answer for it, not just for Amos, for Thomas too." Sarah straightened, wiping furiously at tears she hadn't realized were falling, replacing grief with a cold, clarifying determination. "This isn't just your fight anymore, Jack. This is mine." The next blow landed before dawn. A pounding at Judge Harmon's door roused them all from the brief, uneasy sleep they'd managed in his office, and Deputy Reyes burst in moments later, face ashen. "Judge, we got trouble." He was breathing hard like he'd run the whole way. "Mrs. Whitfield's house. Someone broke in overnight." Sarah's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Lily, she's gone," Reyes confirmed grimly. "Whitfield's shaken but unharmed, says 2 men came in through the back, took the girl while she slept. Left a note." He handed it over, and Harmon read it aloud, voice tight, with barely restrained fury. "Bring the ledger and the man called Dalton to the old freight yard by noon, or the girl doesn't see another sunset. Come alone or don't come at all." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Pike!" Jack breathed fury and terror warring in his expression. "That bastard took an innocent child to force our hand." "We have to go," Sarah said immediately. "Whatever it costs, we can't let that girl pay for our choices. If we hand over the ledger, everything we've risked means nothing," Harmon warned. "Reed's death, your journey, all of it for nothing if Pike destroys the evidence and walks free. I don't care about the evidence right now." Sarah's voice cracked raw with fear for a child she'd known less than a day, but already loved fiercely. "That's an 11-year-old girl who already lost both her parents. I won't let her lose her life too, not for a piece of paper, however important. Jack's hand found hers, steadying, though his own eyes carried the same desperate fear. There might be another way. He looked at Harmon. Judge, can you make a copy of the key pages enough to still build a case, even if the original goes missing? It would take hours we don't have. Then we work fast. Jack's jaw set with grim determination. We bring something that looks like the ledger. Buys us time to get Lily clear before Pike realizes he's been played. That's a dangerous gamble, Reyes cautioned. Man like Pike, he'll check close enough to know if it's the real thing. Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance to check before we've got that girl safe. Jack's eyes moved to Sarah, something fierce and protective blazing there. I've got an idea. Might be crazy enough to work. Noon found them approaching the old freight yard on the edge of town. Weathered warehouses casting long shadows across cracked dirt and rusted rail cars, the perfect place for violence to unfold unwitnessed. Jack rode beside Sarah, the false ledger hastily assembled pages that Harmon had copied with painstaking care hidden inside his coat, while Deputy Reyes and 2 additional men Harmon had trusted circled wide, taking positions among the abandoned structures. Kincaid was waiting at the yard center, flanked by 6 armed men. Lily Reed standing small and terrified between 2 of them, her hands bound, tears streaking silent tracks down her dirty face. Lily! Sarah's voice broke as she dismounted, fighting every instinct to run straight to the girl. Sarah! Lily's voice cracked with relief and terror in equal measure. I'm scared. Quiet, girl. One of Kincaid's men jerked her roughly, and Jack's entire body went rigid with barely contained violence. Touch her again, Jack said, voice deadly quiet. And I promise you, whatever happens next, you won't walk away from it. Kincaid laughed, cold and mocking. Big words for a man with nothing left to bargain but a book of paper. You got the ledger. You got the girl safe first. Jack held his ground, though Sarah could see the tension coiled through every line of his body. Let her go, and you get what you came for. Don't work that way, Dalton. Kincaid's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Ledger first, then we talk about the girl. No. Sarah's voice cut across the standoff, surprising everyone, including herself. You let her walk to us right now, or there's no deal at all. You can shoot us where we stand, but you'll never get what you're after, 'cause I'll burn that ledger myself before I let you have it, while that child's still in danger. Silence stretched taut across the yard, Kincaid's calculating gaze moving between Sarah's fierce determination and Jack's barely restrained fury, clearly weighing the odds. Fine, Kincaid said, finally, voice dripping contempt. Let her go. One of the men shoved Lily forward, and she stumbled sobbing straight into Sarah's waiting arms. Sarah held her tight, feeling the girl's whole body shaking, and looked up to find Kincaid's hand already extended, expectant. Ledger! Now! Jack drew the false pages from his coat, tossing them across the distance between them. Kincaid caught it, flipping through quickly, his expression shifting from satisfaction to sudden dawning suspicion as he scanned the pages more carefully. This ain't right, he said, slowly looking up. This handwriting's too fresh. This is a copy. Run! Jack shouted, already moving, grabbing Sarah and shoving her and Lily toward the nearest cover as Kincaid's face contorted with rage. They're playing us, take them down! Gunfire erupted across the freight yard, chaos exploding in every direction as Reyes and Harmon's men opened fire from their concealed positions, catching Kincaid's outfit in a crossfire they hadn't anticipated. Sarah dove behind an overturned rail car, Lily clutched tight against her chest, both of them screaming as bullets sparked off metal inches from where they crouched. Jack? Sarah's voice tore from her throat, desperate, searching through the chaos for any sign of him. Here! His voice came from somewhere to her left, strained with effort. Stay down. Stay with the girl. The gunfight raged for what felt like hours, but couldn't have lasted more than a few desperate minutes. The sound deafening, terrifying, until finally, A new voice cut through the chaos, commanding authoritative. "Federal marshals, drop your weapons, all of you." Marshal Henry Cole rode into the yard flanked by a dozen armed men, and the sudden shift in numbers proved decisive. Kincaid's remaining men, seeing the tide turn decisively against them, began throwing down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. But Kincaid himself wasn't finished. Sarah watched in horror as he grabbed for his horse, wheeling to flee, but not before snatching something from the ground, the real ledger which must have fallen from Jack's coat during the chaos. "He's got it!" Jack's voice raw with desperation as he broke cover, sprinting after Kincaid, despite his still healing wound. Jack no. But Jack was already moving, tackling Kincaid from his horse, before the man could fully mount, both of them crashing hard into the dirt, grappling desperately for control of the ledger between them. "Give it up, Dalton," Kincaid snarled, landing a vicious blow that snapped Jack's head back. "This ends with me winning one way or another." Jack absorbed the hit, twisting, using his weight to pin Kincaid despite the pain screaming through his reopened wound. "It ends with justice, Kincaid. Something you and Pike never understood." The fight was brutal, desperate, both men bloodied and exhausted, until finally Jack managed to wrench the ledger free, rolling clear just as Cole's men descended, weapons trained, forcing Kincaid to finally surrender, hands raised, face twisted with impotent fury. "This ain't over," Kincaid spat as they dragged him upright, wrists bound. "Pike's got resources you can't even imagine. You think this changes anything? It changes everything," Cole said grimly, taking the recovered ledger from Jack's trembling hands. "Because this," he held it up, "is enough to bring Caleb Pike's entire empire crashing down around him." Sarah rushed to Jack's side the moment the danger passed, Lily still clinging to her hand, both of them dropping to their knees beside him, as he sat in the dirt, breathing hard, blood soaking fresh through his shirt, where the fight had torn his wound open again. "You absolute fool," she said, voice thick with fear and fury, and something far softer underneath both. "You could have been killed. Wasn't gonna let him get away with it. Not after everything." Jack's voice was weak but steady, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that stole her breath even in the chaos surrounding them. "Had to see it through, Sarah. For Amos. For your husband. For everyone Pike's hurt trying to build his empire on other people's suffering. You almost died proving a point. Wouldn't be the first time." A weak, exhausted smile. "Reckon it won't be the last long, as men like Pike exist in this world." Cole crouched beside them, examining the ledger, with careful hands, his expression grim but satisfied. "This is everything we need. Land fraud, murder, bribery, enough evidence to convict Pike a dozen times over, assuming we can get him into a courtroom before he flees the territory entirely." "He's here," Jack said, wincing as Sarah pressed a cloth hard against his renewed wound. "In Abilene. Kincaid mentioned it back at Sarah's ranch. Pike wanted to be here personal, make sure nothing went wrong with recovering this ledger." Cole's expression sharpened. "Then he's still in town, which means we've got a chance to end this today, once and for all." He looked at Jack, something like respect dawning in his weathered features. "You did good, son. Amos would be proud seeing how far you carried this. Wouldn't have made it without her." Jack's eyes found Sarah's again, something raw and unguarded passing between them, despite the chaos and pain surrounding them both. "Every step of this, she's the reason I'm still standing to see it through." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, despite everything, despite the danger still circling, despite the fresh grief of learning her husband's death might not have been the accident she'd mourned for 2 long years. "Don't go getting sentimental on me now, Jack Dalton. We still got a monster to catch." "Ma'am," Jack said, wincing as he tried and failed to stand without her help. "With respect, I think that's exactly what I intend to keep doing, long as you're willing to stand beside me while I do it." The words hung between them heavier than either of them had probably intended, until Lily's small voice broke the moment. "Does this mean my papa's gonna get justice for real this time?" Sarah pulled the girl close, pressing a kiss to her dirty hair throat tight with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. This means your papa's finally gonna get the justice he deserved all along." But even as she said it, watching Cole's men move to secure the ledger, watching Jack struggle to stay upright despite his renewed wound. Sarah understood that the hardest part still lay ahead. Caleb Pike remained free somewhere in this town, cornered now and more dangerous than ever. A wounded animal with nothing left to lose, and every reason to make his final stand as violent and desperate as the man himself. The war wasn't over. It had only just reached its most dangerous hour. Cole wasted no time organizing his men, splitting them into groups to cover every road leading out of Abilene. But Jack knew Pike well enough to understand the man wouldn't run. Not yet. Not while there was still a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of his empire. "He'll be at the Cattleman's Hotel," Jack said, forcing himself upright despite Sarah's protests. One hand still pressed hard against his bandaged side. "Pike never stays anywhere less than the finest room in town. Man's got too much pride to hide in some back alley boarding house. You're in no condition to go after him," Sarah said, fear sharpening her voice into something almost angry. "You've been shot twice in a week, Jack. You can barely stand." "I can stand long enough for this." His eyes met hers, steady despite the pain evident in every line of his body. "I have to see this through, Sarah. Not just for Amos. For your husband, too. For every family Pike's ruined trying to build his empire." "Then let Cole and his men handle it. That's what lawmen are for. Pike knows me. Knows my face, my voice. If I'm standing there when they take him, he can't claim later that this was some frame-up cooked by strangers who never even met him." Jack's jaw set with grim determination. "I need him to look me in the eye and know that I'm the one who brought him down. For Amos. So wherever he is now, he knows it's finished." Sarah wanted to argue further, wanted to drag him bodily back to Harmon's office and force him to rest. But something in his expression told her this particular battle was one she wouldn't win. Instead, she reached for the rifle Cole had lent her, checking the chamber with hands that had gone steady, despite the fear still coursing through her. "Then I'm coming with you." "Sarah, don't!" She cut him off, fierce. "We've been over this already, Jack Dalton. I didn't ride 2 hard days and nearly die in a freight yard shootout just to sit safe in an office while you finish this alone. Lily's safe with Mrs. Whitfield. Cole's got men watching every exit. There's nothing left for me to protect from a distance." Jack studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes. Fear for her safety, warring visibly with a growing respect that Sarah had watched build steadily across every mile of their journey together. Finally, he nodded, slow and reluctant. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens. We'll see about that." The Cattleman's Hotel rose up 3 stories against the afternoon sky, its false front grandeur a fitting monument to a man who'd built his fortune on lies dressed up as legitimate business. Cole's men fanned out discreetly around the perimeter, while Jack and Sarah approached the front entrance with Deputy Reyes flanking them, weapons ready but concealed. The hotel clerk paled the moment Cole flashed his badge. "Room 301, the man stammered. "Mr. Pike's been expecting visitors, I think. Told me not to let anyone up unless they had business direct with him." "We've got business," Cole said grimly. "Direct enough." They climbed the stairs in tense silence, every creak of old wood beneath their boots sounding thunderous in the charged quiet. Jack's hand drifted to the pistol at his hip, and Sarah found herself doing the same, some part of her still disbelieving that she'd become a woman capable of walking toward armed danger instead of away from it. Cole knocked once, then kicked the door open before anyone could answer. Rifle raised, Reyes moving in behind him with equal speed. The room beyond was elegant, expensively furnished, and entirely empty. "Damn it!" Cole's curse was low, furious. "He's gone." Jack pushed past them, scanning the room with a hunter's eye, taking in details the others might have missed. A half-empty glass of whiskey still cool to the touch when he pressed his fingers against it. A window cracked open, curtains stirring in the afternoon breeze. "He hasn't gone far," Jack said. "Glass is still cold. He heard us coming and slipped out that window not 5 minutes back, which means he's on foot in a town he doesn't know as well as we do." Cole moved to the window, scanning the alley below. "Reyes get men covering the train depot and the stables. If Pike's running, he's running for one of those 2 places. There's something else." Jack had crossed to the room's small writing desk, where a leather satchel sat half-open papers, spilling out in careless haste. He lifted one, scanning it quickly, his face going hard with fresh fury. "Sarah, you need to see this." She crossed to his side, taking the paper from his hands, and felt her blood run cold as she read the contents. A detailed plan dated 18 months prior, outlining a scheme to manufacture a water rights dispute against her late husband's property, followed by a chilling notation, Whitmore proving stubborn. Alternative solution required. Dr. Aldridge has agreed to cooperate for appropriate compensation. "That's it," Sarah breathed, hands trembling so badly the paper shook. "That's proof. Real proof, not just Reed's suspicions. Pike ordered my husband's death in writing in his own hand." Cole took the document carefully, his expression grave. "This changes everything, Sarah. This isn't just fraud and one murder anymore. This is a pattern of premeditated violence against an entire community documented in Pike's own hand. Enough to see him hang, assuming we catch him before he crosses county lines." The weight of 2 years of grief, confusion, and quiet unexplained loss crashed over Sarah all at once, and she found herself gripping the edge of the writing desk for support, the room tilting dangerously around her. "Sarah." Jack's hands found her shoulders steady, grounding exactly as they'd been that first terrible night in her barn. "Breathe. I know this is God. I can't even imagine what this is doing to you right now. But we're close. We're so close to finishing this. He killed Thomas." She whispered the words, tasting like poison even as she forced them out. 2 years, Jack. 2 years I mourned him, blamed myself for not noticing the fever sooner, wondered if I could have done something different. And it was never an accident at all. It was murder dressed up pretty so nobody would ever look twice. "I know." Jack's voice was rough with a fury that matched her own, tempered only by the tenderness underneath it. "And I promise you, Sarah, we are going to make him answer for every bit of it. Amos, your husband. Every family he's destroyed built in his rotten empire. But I need you steady right now, understand? I need you with me, not lost in the grief, not yet. There'll be time for that after. Right now we finish this." Sarah closed her eyes, drawing on some reserve of strength she hadn't known she still possessed, and nodded slowly. "You're right. Finish this first. Grieve after." She opened her eyes, something cold and clear settling into her expression. "Let's go find that monster." They found him at the stables exactly as Cole had predicted, in the process of saddling a horse with hands that shook with barely contained panic. Caleb Pike was smaller than Sarah had imagined, not the towering, menacing figure his reputation suggested, but a slight, balding man in an expensive suit, now rumpled from his hasty flight, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Pike!" Cole's voice cracked like a whip across the stable yard. "Federal Marshal, hands where I can see them." Pike froze, hand still gripping the saddle horn, calculation flickering rapidly behind his eyes as he assessed his rapidly diminishing options. "Marshal Cole, I don't believe we've had the pleasure. We're about to get considerably better acquainted." Cole advanced slowly, rifle steady, Reyes and 2 more deputies flanking wide to cut off any avenue of escape. "Caleb Pike, you're under arrest for the murder of Deputy Amos Reed, the murder of Thomas Whitmore, extensive land fraud, and bribery of public officials." Pike's composure cracked, just slightly, panic bleeding through the careful mask he'd worn for so long. "This is absurd. I'm a respected businessman. Whatever lies you've been told—" "Ain't lies," Jack said, stepping forward, and Pike's eyes finally landed on him, widening with sudden dawning recognition. "Vane." The name came out as barely more than a breath. "You're supposed to be dead. Kincaid assured me. Kincaid's in custody along with your ledger and your own written confession to order in Thomas Whitmore's murder." Jack's voice carried a controlled fury that Sarah had never heard from him before, cold and absolute. "It's over, Pike. Whatever empire you built on other people's blood and suffering, it ends today." Pike's eyes darted wildly, searching for some final escape, some last card to play. His gaze landed on Sarah, and something calculating flickered behind his panic. You're the widow, Whitmore's wife." "I'm the woman whose husband you murdered," Sarah said, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. So you could steal her land and add it to your rotten empire. That's not. Pike's composure cracked further, the careful businessman's mask finally splitting to reveal the calculating monster beneath. Your husband was going to ruin everything. 2 years of careful work and he refused to sell, refused to see reason. Some sacrifices are necessary for progress. The confession spoken so casually, so devoid of any real remorse, seemed to shatter something in Sarah's chest. Before she quite understood what she was doing, she'd crossed the distance between them, and only Jack's quick hand on her arm stopped her from striking the man who'd destroyed 2 years of her life with such careless cruelty. Sarah. Jack's voice was gentle despite the iron grip he maintained on her arm. He's not worth it. Let the law handle him now. Let him answer for it properly in front of everyone. Sarah trembled with the effort of restraint, but forced herself to step back, watching as Cole's men moved in securing Pike's wrists in iron manacles, despite his continued protests of innocence and threats of powerful friends, who would see this injustice corrected. "You'll regret this," Pike snarled, as they marched him toward the waiting jail wagon. "I have connections in this territory that extend far beyond a small-town marshal's reach. This isn't finished." "Maybe not," Cole said grimly, shoving him forward. "But your part in it is." The trial, when it finally came 3 weeks later, drew crowds from across the territory. Ranchers who'd lost land to Pike's forged deeds, families who'd suffered under his corruption, all gathered to witness justice finally catch up to a man who'd operated above the law for far too long. Sarah sat in the front row of the crowded courthouse, Lily beside her. The girl's hand gripped tight in hers throughout the proceedings. Jack sat on her other side, still healing, still moving with careful caution, but present and steady, despite everything they'd endured to reach this moment. Judge Harmon presided with the same measured patience Sarah had witnessed in their first meeting, guiding the proceedings through testimony after damning testimony. Marshal Cole's account of Reed's murder investigation, Deputy Reyes's description of the freight yard confrontation, the doctor who'd finally confessed under oath to falsifying Thomas Whitmore's death certificate in exchange for Pike's money. But it was Jack's testimony that held the courtroom in absolute breathless silence. "I rode for Caleb Pike for the better part of 2 years," Jack said, standing tall despite the visible effort it cost him, his voice carrying clear across the packed room. "Didn't understand what kind of man he was, not at first. By the time I did, I was in too deep to walk away clean. Amos Reed helped me get free of it. Helped me build a new life, a chance at honest livin'. And Pike had him murdered for trying to expose the truth about what he'd built." "And you were accused of that murder?" Harmon prompted gently. "Framed for it, Your Honor. Last man seen with Reed before he died, which made me the easiest target for Pike's men to pin the blame on." Jack's voice roughened emotion breaking through his careful control. "I spent 2 years running carrying a promise I made to a dying friend, trying to see justice done, even if it cost me my own life to accomplish it." "And did it cost you, I mean?" Jack's eyes found Sarah's across the courtroom, something raw and grateful passing between them. "Nearly did, Your Honor. If not for the courage of a widow who had every reason to turn me away and chose instead to help a stranger, I wouldn't be standing here today. Wouldn't have made it to Abilene alive." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as dozens of eyes turned toward her. But she held her chin high, refusing to look away, refusing to be ashamed of the choice that had led her here. The prosecution built its case methodically, ledger entry by ledger entry, witness by witness, until even Pike's expensive lawyers seemed to sense the tide turning irreversibly against their client. When Pike himself finally took the stand, forced by the weight of evidence to offer some defense, his composure cracked entirely under Harmon's relentless questioning. "You ordered the murder of Deputy Amos Reed," Harmon said, voice hard as iron. "You ordered the murder of Thomas Whitmore. You forged documents, bribed officials, and destroyed the lives of dozens of families across this territory, all in pursuit of personal wealth and power." "I built an empire," Pike snapped, finally abandoning all pretense of innocence. "Every great fortune requires sacrifice. Every empire is built on the ruins of lesser men who couldn't see the necessity of progress. There is no necessity in murder, Mr. Pike." Harmon's voice carried absolute final judgment. There is only cruelty dressed up in whatever justification a guilty man tells himself to sleep at night. The verdict, when it finally came, surprised no one in the packed courtroom. Guilty on every count. The sentence, delivered with grim finality, would see Caleb Pike spend the remainder of his life behind bars, his empire dismantled piece by piece as the court worked to return stolen land to its rightful owners. As the marshals led Pike from the courtroom in chains, Sarah felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for 2 long years. Not quite peace, not yet, but the first fragile beginnings of it. Hey! Outside the courthouse in the golden afternoon light, the crowd slowly dispersed, ranchers and townsfolk, offering quiet words of gratitude and solidarity to Sarah and Jack both. Marshal Cole approached his weathered face, carrying an expression of profound satisfaction. "Amos would be proud," he said quietly. 2 years of careful work, and it finally paid off. Justice at last. "Wouldn't have happened without you, Marshal," Jack said, extending his hand. "You put your own neck on the line, trusting a stranger's word over Pike's power and influence." "Trusted Amos's judgment," Cole corrected, shaking his hand firmly. "Man never once steered me wrong, even from beyond the grave, seems like." He glanced toward Sarah, something gentler in his expression now. "And I trusted a woman brave enough to risk everything for the truth, even when it would have been easier to look away." Sarah felt tears threatening again, though these carried none of the bitter grief from before. Something softer now, something closer to gratitude. What happens now to the ledger, to Pike's stolen land? "Judge Harmon's already working on returning property to its rightful owners, including your own water rights, Sarah. Should have full title restored within the month." Cole's expression turned more serious. "As for Jack, I know I'm not entirely clear yet," Jack said quietly. 2 years riding for Pike leaves a mark, even if I broke free of it eventually. There's consequences still to face for that time, whatever good I managed to do since." "There's a process," Cole acknowledged. "Won't be easy and won't be quick. But given everything you've done to expose Pike's crimes, given Amos's own testimony about your character before he died." He paused, considering his words carefully. "I think there's a real chance for you to come out the other side of this clean, Jack. A real chance at the honest life you've been chasing." Jack's shoulders sagged with visible relief, 2 years of accumulated fear and guilt finally finding some measure of release. "That's more than I dared hope for, Marshal. More than I figured I deserved, given everything." "Amos believed in you," Cole said simply. "That's good enough for me." That evening, in a small room Judge Harmon had arranged for them at a respectable boarding house, Sarah found herself standing at the window watching the sun set over a town that had witnessed justice finally triumph over corruption and greed. Lily had been settled with Mrs. Whitfield for the night, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, there was nothing urgent demanding her attention. No danger circling closer, no desperate need to keep moving, just quiet, and the weight of everything that had happened finally catching up to her all at once. She heard Jack's careful footsteps behind her before he spoke, his voice soft in the gathering dusk. "You've been awful quiet since the verdict." "Lot to process," she admitted, not turning from the window. 2 years, Jack. 2 years I mourned Thomas as an accident, told myself there was nothing I could have done different, nothing I could have seen coming. And it turns out he was murdered, deliberate and cold, and I never even suspected. Wasn't your fault. Pike's men were careful, thorough. Even Reed didn't catch it until months after, and he was looking specific for exactly that kind of corruption. I know that in my head." She finally turned to face him, eyes glistening in the fading light. "Doesn't make it hurt any less knowing it." Jack crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, though he made no move to touch her, giving her the space to close whatever distance remained between them. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Sorry you had to learn this way. Sorry your grief got complicated by discovering it was never just cruel misfortune. Don't apologize. You gave me the truth even when it would have been easier to let me keep believing the comfortable lie." She reached out finally and took his hand, feeling the calluses there, the strength in his grip despite everything he'd endured. "I'd rather have painful truth Then comfortable ignorance, Jack. Always. Even knowin' what it costs to get there, especially knowin' that. Her voice caught slightly. You nearly died more than once trying to see this through. Kincaid Pike, all of it. You could have walked away at any point, let someone else carry Amos's fight forward. Why didn't you? Told you once already. Made a promise to a dying friend. His thumb traced gentle patterns against the back of her hand, something tender and searching in the gesture. But truth is somewhere along the way it stopped being just about that promise. What changed? Jack was quiet a long moment, searching for words adequate to something clearly larger than easy explanation. You did, Sarah. Watchin' you find courage you didn't know you had, watchin' you choose to help a wounded stranger instead of turnin' him away, watchin' you ride straight into danger for justice that wasn't even originally your fight. He met her eyes, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Made me want to be a man worth that kind of courage. Worth the risk you took letting me into your barn that first night. Sarah felt her breath catch the weight of 2 years of careful isolation of grief-hardened walls, built brick by brick, against further loss, finally beginning to crack under the warmth of his words. Jack, I know it's complicated. He continued quick, like he needed to get the words out before courage failed him. I know I'm still figuring out what my future looks like, still got consequences to face for my time riding with Pike, even if I broke free of it eventually. I got no right asking anything of you given how uncertain everything still is. Then don't ask, Sarah said softly. Just tell me true. What is it you want, Jack Dalton? His eyes searched hers, something desperate and hopeful in equal measure. I want the chance to be worthy of you, Sarah Whitmore. Whatever that takes, however long it requires. I want to earn the kind of trust you gave me that first terrible night, when every sensible instinct told you to turn me away. The confession hung between them fragile and precious, and Sarah felt something long frozen finally beginning to thaw in her chest, not replacing the grief for Thomas, never that, but something new growing alongside it, tender and uncertain, but undeniably real. Then earn it, she whispered. Take whatever time you need to make things right, to face whatever consequences remain from your past. And when you're ready, if you're ready, you know where to find me. Your barn, a ghost of his old humor, gentle and hopeful. My door. Sarah corrected voice, thick with emotion. This time, Jack Dalton, you'll be welcome to walk through the front door. Sarah rode back to her ranch alone 3 days later. Lily's small arms wrapped tight around her waist for the first leg of the journey, before the girl was delivered safely into Mrs. Whitfield's permanent care. The courts having granted formal guardianship, given the circumstances of her father's death. The parting had been tearful, both of them clinging a moment too long at the boarding house steps. You'll write? Lily had asked, fierce and small, that rag doll still clutched against her chest. Every month, Sarah had promised. And you'll come visit the ranch come summer. There's a whole barn full of kittens you haven't even met yet. Real kittens, not the mean kind that scratch. The mean kind mostly grow out of it if you're patient enough with them. Sarah had smoothed the girl's dark hair back from her face, throat tight. Kind of like people, Lily. Given enough time and enough kindness, most broken things find their way toward healing. The words had stayed with her the whole ride home, echoing louder with every mile that put distance between herself and Jack. Her ranch looked exactly as she'd left it. Martha Briggs had kept her promise faithfully. Chickens fed cow, milked, garden weeded, despite her own aching joints, and yet everything about the place felt different somehow, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with absence. She stood in her kitchen that first night home, staring at the empty chair where Jack had once sat eating cornbread and telling her the truth about a dead friend's promise, and felt the full weight of loneliness crash back over her with a force she hadn't anticipated. 2 years she'd survived this silence, told herself it was enough. Now, after less than 2 weeks with another voice filling her house, another presence sharing her burdens, the quiet felt less like peace and more like punishment. Fool woman, she muttered to herself, blowing out the lamp. Getting attached to a man who's got his own reckoning still ahead of him. But sleep, when it finally came, carried dreams of barn doors and brass keys, and a voice calling her name like it meant something sacred. The weeks that followed fell into a strange new rhythm. Sarah threw herself back into ranch work with a fierce, almost desperate energy. Mending fences, tending stock, restoring the routine that had once felt like enough. Judge Harmon's promised restoration of her water rights came through within 3 weeks, exactly as Cole had predicted, along with a formal letter acknowledging the fraudulent nature of the original dispute, and a modest compensation that would see her through the coming winter, without struggle, for the first time in years. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, going through motions that no longer quite fit the woman she'd become. Martha noticed first, of course. Martha noticed everything. "You're waiting on something," the older woman observed one afternoon, watching Sarah stare at the road leading toward town for the third time in an hour, instead of finishing the mending in her lap. "Or someone." "Don't know what you mean." "Sarah Whitmore, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Don't go telling me you don't know exactly what or who you're watching that road for." Martha's eyes softened with knowing sympathy. "Man said he needed time to make things right. Doesn't mean he's forgotten you. Doesn't mean he ain't coming back." "It's been a month, Martha. And a man rebuilding his whole life from the ground up, facing whatever consequences remain from riding with a criminal, even innocent as his part in it turned out to be, that's not something that happens overnight." Martha reached over, patting Sarah's hand with weathered fingers. "Patience, child. Some things worth having take time to arrive proper." Sarah wanted to believe her. Some days she almost did. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 4 weeks after she'd left Abilene, delivered by a rider passing through on his way to Ellsworth. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, deliberate, each letter formed with the concentration of a man unaccustomed to writing much beyond his own name. "Sarah, Judge Harmon's court has cleared me of all charges related to my time riding with Pike, given my role in exposing his crimes and the testimony provided on my behalf by Marshal Cole and others. There's still work being done to settle matters proper. Some of Pike's former associates ain't took kindly to losing their protector, and there's men still looking to make trouble for anyone who helped bring him down. Cole's been keeping me busy, helping track down the last of Pike's network, on account of I know faces and names better than most. I think of your ranch more often than I probably should, given how things were left between us. I think of that barn, and that first terrible night, and how close I came to being turned away entire. I think of cornbread, and a woman brave enough to patch a stranger's wounds when every sensible thought told her not to. I ain't ready yet to come knocking proper. Still got loose ends to tie here in Abilene. Still got a debt to Amos's memory that requires seeing this through completely before I can rightly claim to be the man worth walking through your front door. But I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten. Haven't forgotten you or what you risked, or what you offered when you had every reason to refuse. Whatever time this takes, I intend to earn my way back to that door. Yours in gratitude and hope, Jack." Sarah read the letter 4 times before she trusted her voice enough to speak, and even then the words came out thick with emotion she hadn't expected to feel so completely. She folded it carefully and tucked it into the same apron pocket that had once carried Jack's wanted poster, a strange poetic symmetry that wasn't lost on her. That night she wrote back, and the night after that another letter arrived from Abilene. A correspondence began slow and careful. At first, then growing steadily more open as the weeks passed, 2 people separated by distance, but drawing closer through ink and paper, and the particular intimacy that came from writing truths too difficult to speak aloud in person. Autumn arrived, painting the Kansas plains gold and amber, and with it came news that shifted everything once more. Marshal Cole rode out to Sarah's ranch himself, dismounting with the weary satisfaction of a man who'd finally closed a chapter long overdue for ending. "Got news you'll want to hear," he said, accepting the coffee Sarah offered without preamble. "Last of Pike's network's been rounded up. Kincaid's been sentenced hanging come spring for his part in Reed's murder, and the attempted murder of a federal officer during the freight yard incident." Sarah felt no particular satisfaction at the news, only a grim sense of closure. And Jack? Cole's weathered face broke into something almost like a smile. Cleared entire. Every charge dropped, formal exoneration entered into the county record. Man's finally free to build whatever life he chooses without Pike's shadow hanging over him anymore. Relief flooded through Sarah so completely, her knees nearly buckled. Where is he now? Last I saw him packing up what little he owns, talking about heading west toward Kansas territory. Cole's eyes held a particular knowing glint. Man mentioned something about a ranch and a widow and a debt of gratitude he intended to spend the rest of his life repaying if she'd have him. Sarah's breath caught entirely. He said that, more or less. Cole set down his coffee cup, standing to leave. Figured you'd want fair warning, Sarah. Man like that finally free after 2 years of running and hiding, when he sets his mind towards something he doesn't waste much time getting there. Meh. She heard the hoofbeats 3 days later, in the fading gold light of late afternoon, and something in her chest recognized the rhythm of them before her mind fully caught up to the realization. Sarah stepped out onto her porch, heart hammering with a fear that had nothing to do with danger this time, and watched a familiar rider approach thinner than she remembered, but standing straighter in the saddle, moving with none of the wounded caution that had marked their first desperate days together. Jack Dalton reined up at her gate exactly where he'd first collapsed bleeding, and hunted. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply looking at each other across the distance that had grown into something far more significant than mere yards of dirt and fence. "Evening, ma'am," he said finally, voice carrying that same dry, careful humor from their first meeting, though everything underneath it had changed completely. "Mr. Dalton." Sarah's voice wavered, despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "Didn't expect you'd be coming through these parts again. Wasn't planning on staying away forever." He dismounted slowly, and she noticed his movements carried none of the pain and weakness from before. Healed now whole, a man rebuilt from the wreckage of his past into something stronger. "Got some business I intended to finish if the lady of the house is willing to hear me out." "That's so." Sarah crossed her arms, though her heart was racing with a hope she barely dared acknowledge. "What kind of business would that be?" Jack approached slowly, stopping at the base of her porch steps. Deliberately, she realized, waiting for her permission before crossing that final threshold. "Court cleared me entire, Sarah. Every charge Pike's lies ever placed on my name wiped clean. I'm not running anymore. Not from lawmen, not from my past, not from anything. Cole told me as much. Then he probably told you what else I mentioned too." Jack's eyes held hers steady and open in a way she'd never quite seen before. No more secrets, no more hidden names, nothing left to guard against. "I came here to ask if I might sleep in your barn again, ma'am. Just for the night, if that's all you're willing to offer." The echo of his first request, 4 months distant, now settled over Sarah with the weight of everything that had changed since the danger survived. The truths uncovered, the grief transformed into something closer to peace. And underneath it all, a connection forged through fire that had only grown stronger with distance and time. "You know," she said slowly, fighting to keep her voice from breaking entirely. "Last time you asked that question, I nearly shot you for your trouble. I recall it vivid, ma'am. Wasn't my finest introduction. And yet, here you are again asking the same fool question. Figured it worked out well enough the first time, all things considered." A ghost of that familiar, hopeful smile. "Though I confess, I'm hoping for a different answer this go-round." Sarah descended the porch steps slowly, closing the distance between them, with steps that felt both terrifying and inevitable in equal measure. "The barn's still there, if that's truly what you're asking for." "It ain't." His voice dropped lower, rougher with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. "Truth is, Sarah, I've spent 4 months writing letters trying to find the words to tell you what I mean to say now, face to face, without the safety of ink and paper between us." He reached out hesitant, and she let him take her hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the steady strength that had carried them both through danger and back again. "I don't want your barn anymore. Haven't wanted just your barn since that very first night. If I'm being honest, though, I was too broken and too hunted to admit it even to myself." "Then what is it you're asking for, Jack Dalton?" "Everything," he said, simply, achingly honest. Your trust freely given this time, not forced by circumstance or desperate need. Your patience while I build whatever honest life still remains possible for a man who spent 2 years running from his own mistakes. Your heart, if you're willing to risk giving it to a man who nearly got you killed more than once in the process of proving himself worthy of it. Sarah felt tears finally breaking free, no longer held back by the careful control she'd maintained through months of uncertainty and distance. That's a considerable amount you're asking for Mr. Dalton. I know it. And I know I've got no right expecting any of it given everything you've already sacrificed on my account. His grip tightened on her hand, desperate now, afraid of the answer, even as he pushed forward with the question. But I love you, Sarah Whitmore. Have for longer than I probably had any right to given how it started. And I'm asking with everything I am, whether you might find room in your heart and your home for a man who's finally free to offer you something real instead of just danger and desperate promises. The confession hung between them raw and complete, and Sarah felt the last of her careful walls built brick by brick since Thomas's death, reinforced through 2 years of solitary grief, finally crumble, entirely replaced by something warmer, more hopeful than she'd allowed herself to feel in longer than she cared to admit. "You can come in for coffee," she said finally, voice thick with tears and laughter both. "This time, Jack Dalton, you'll be walking through my front door." Chappiger. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at Sarah's ranch, attended by everyone who'd played a part in their impossible journey toward this moment. Marshall Cole stood as witness, weathered face, creased with genuine joy for the first time since Sarah had known him. Judge Harmon traveled from Abilene specially to officiate, declaring afterward that he'd rarely presided over a union so thoroughly earned through fire and hardship. Martha Briggs cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and muttering about foolish, stubborn young people who'd taken entirely too long to recognize what stood plainly before them. Lily Reed, now 12 and thriving under Mrs. Whitfield's steady care, served as flower girl, scattering wildflowers with the same fierce determination she'd once shown clutching her father's cedar box against impossible odds. She'd grown taller, steadier. The haunted grief in her eyes gradually replaced by something closer to ordinary childhood joy, though Sarah suspected some scars from losing both parents would never fully fade, only soften with time and love and patient care. "You look happy," Lily observed that afternoon, watching Sarah in her simple wedding dress, sunlight catching gold in hair she'd carefully arranged for the occasion. "Papa would have liked Jack, I think. Liked that he kept his promise. Your papa's the reason any of this happened at all, sweetheart." Sarah knelt to the girl's level, cupping her face gently. His courage investigating Pike, even knowing the danger, saving Jack from that life before it consumed him entirely, that started everything that led us here today. Does that mean he's still here in a way, watching over everything? I believe it does. Sarah pressed a gentle kiss to the girl's forehead. I believe the people we love never truly leave us, not entirely. They live on in the changes their courage set into motion, in the justice their sacrifice finally achieved. That evening, after the guests had departed and Lily had returned to Mrs. Whitfield's care for the night, Sarah and Jack stood together beside Thomas's grave, the same spot where 2 years of solitary grief had once felt like her only remaining companion. "I owe you an apology," Jack said quietly, standing respectful distance from the modest headstone. "For the pain my arrival brought back into your life, learning the truth about how he died. Don't." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "You gave me truth, Jack, painful as it was to learn. And that truth led to justice finally after 2 years of believing his death was nothing but random cruelty. There's peace in that, even amid the pain of learning it." She knelt beside the grave, resting her hand against the weathered stone. "Thomas, I want you to meet Jack, the man I married today. I think you'd have liked him, difficult as that might have been to imagine given how our story began." Her voice caught slightly. "I haven't forgotten you, and I never will. But I've learned something important these past months, that loving again doesn't erase the love that came before. It just means there's room enough in a heart for both kinds of love to exist together, each honoring the other in its own way." Jack knelt beside her, adding his own quiet words. I promise you, Thomas Whitmore, I'll take care of her. Protect what's left of your legacy honor, what you built here, and love her with everything I've got. Remainin' after everything Pike's crimes tried to steal from both of us. He paused, voice rough with emotion. Thank you for the years you gave her before I ever arrived. For the strength she carries because of the life you built together. I intend to build on that foundation, not replace it. They stood together as the sun set fully behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant orange and gold. Two survivors of different kinds of loss, finding unexpected peace in each other's company, neither diminishing what had come before, both honoring it while building something new and hopeful in its place. Years later, when their own children asked about how their parents had met, Sarah would tell the story carefully, honestly, holding nothing back of the danger and desperation that had marked those first terrifying days. Your father showed up bleedin' at my gate, she'd say, watching Jack's familiar embarrassed smile from across their kitchen table. Askin' for nothing more than a night in my barn. I nearly shot him, you understand, thinking him nothing but a dangerous outlaw come to bring trouble to my door. But you didn't shoot him. Their eldest daughter would prompt, having heard this story countless times, but never tiring of its telling. No, something in his eyes, something in the way he treated that half-starved horse of his told me there was more to him than the wanted poster suggested. Sarah would reach across the table, taking Jack's weathered hand in hers, the same gesture she'd offered that first terrible night in her barn. Took courage letting a stranger into my life after so much loss. But I learned something important that week watching your father risk everything for justice and truth. What's that, Mama? That love worth having always requires some kind of risk, that the safest path ain't always the one leading toward the life you're meant to live, and that sometimes the very thing you're most afraid of turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. She'd look at Jack then, decades of shared history and hard-won happiness reflected in that familiar gaze. Your father asked to sleep in my barn that first night, thinking himself unworthy of anything more. Took him bringing down an entire criminal empire, clearing his name of false accusations, and traveling halfway across the territory more than once before he finally understood he'd been worthy of my front door all along. Jack would laugh at that, warm and genuine, the sound of a man completely at peace with the life he'd built from the ashes of his troubled past. Wisest woman in the entire Kansas territory, your mother. Took her exactly one look to see straight through every lie I was telling myself, long before I saw it clear enough on my own. Outside their window, the ranch spread wide and prosperous under the Kansas skyland, reclaimed from Pike's fraudulent schemes, now flourishing under decades of honest, dedicated care. The barn where their story had begun still stood, weathered now by years, but sturdy. A quiet monument to the night courage had triumphed over fear, and trust had proven stronger than every reasonable instinct telling two wounded strangers to remain safely apart. Sarah Whitmore. Dalton had learned in the end that love was never about forgetting what came before, never about replacing one grief with another kind of happiness. It was about choosing again and again to remain open to connection despite every scar that argued for permanent isolation. It was about recognizing that the truest courage wasn't found in never being afraid, but in choosing trust anyway, even when every wound from the past screamed caution. And Jack Dalton, once known as Silas Vane, once hunted across half a territory for a crime he never committed, had finally found what 2 years of running and hiding had never provided: not just safety, not just justice, but a home. A place where his name, whatever version of it he chose to carry, would always mean something worth defending. Their story had begun with a wounded stranger asking for nothing more than a single night's shelter in a lonely widow's barn. It ended decades later with a love so thoroughly earned, so completely tested by fire and danger and impossible odds that neither time, nor tragedy, nor the darkest schemes of powerful men could ever hope to diminish it. Some doors once opened by courage never truly close again.